We'll go ahead and get started because it's 5:31. Welcome to the Metropolitan Transit Commission. Today is September 25th, and we're going to call to order now and begin with attendance. If you will please start to my right, introduce yourself, and let us know if you're a voting member or an alternate, that sort of thing, non-voting member.
Dina DiOrio, Mecklenburg County Manager, and I am an alternate.
Brian Welch, Mint Hill Town Manager, alternate.
Brad Simmons, Mayor of the Town of Mint Hill. I'm a voting member.
Christy Clark, Mayor of Huntersville, and Anthony Roberts, Town Manager, is online as a voting member.
David Phillips, Mayor of Pineville, voting member.
John Higdon, Mayor of Matthews, voting member.
Rusty Knox, Mayor Davison, voting member, and Town Manager Jamie Justice is online.
Lee Altman, Mecklenburg County Commissioner, serving at large, voting member.
Brent Cagle, Interim CEO, CATS.
Good afternoon. I'm Vi Laus, Mayor of Charlotte, and I am a voting member.
Brad Thomas, City Attorney's Office.
Tony Lathrop, NCDOT, I'm a voting member.
Andrew Grant, Town Manager Cornelius, voting member, and Mayor Washam is online.
Brian Spitzer, Town Manager of Pineville, and an alternate.
Thank you. And anybody online who would like to come off of mute and introduce yourself, please do so now.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you, Siri.
Hi, Randy Gates, City of Gastonia, non-voting.
Welcome, Randy.
Bill Thunberg, Town of Mooresville, non-voting.
Thanks, Bill.
Tawana Henderson, Town of Mint Hill, non-voting.
Welcome, Commissioner.
I'm Woody Washam, Mayor of Cornelius, non-voting tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Washington.
Chair Harms, Chair of the Transit Service Advisory Committee, non-voting member.
Thank you, Mr. Herms. All right. All right. I think that's everybody. At this time, I will take a motion to approve the August 28th minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Tonight we have one, oh, yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Cagle. Yes.
So thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to announce a change in the agenda. After discussing items 5A and 5B with CRTPO staff and others, I am removing both items from tonight's agenda due to these items not being sufficiently ready for consideration by the MTC at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Cagle. At this time, we'll move to public comment, and we have one person registered to speak, Ms. Hope. Or? Oh, I'm sorry. Or do we have two folks registered? Yes. Yes, yes. Then you can both head that way. If you would please introduce yourself when you get to the podium, and you each have 3 minutes.
Good evening, members of the MTC. My name is Hope Wright, and I am the Advocacy Manager with Sustain Charlotte. Can you all hear me okay through the mask? Okay, all right. So you all have received several emails from me by this point about an initiative called Day Without Driving. I am here to give you one more plug. In partnership with Mecklenburg Air Quality, Charlotte Area Transit System, CDOT, Charlotte's Office of Sustainability, and the Charlotte Regional Transportation Coalition, Sustain Charlotte is organizing our community's participation in National Week Without Driving, which is September 30th to October 6th. That's starting on Monday. National Week Without Driving invites community leaders across the U.S. to take the challenge to better understand what it is like to not be able to drive yourself wherever and whenever you need or want. Last year, 300 elected and public officials from 30 states and Washington, D.C. participated. However, we know that's really hard to get around Charlotte, so we're making it, instead of an entire week, just one day. We hope you will accept the challenge of getting around on Thursday, October 3rd without driving. This is the preferred date, but of course, if that doesn't work for you, we hope you will pick another date within that week. This applies to all travel activities, not just work commutes. but we believe that having this experience is essential for elected officials and decision makers. Some ways you can get around without driving are taking the bus or the train, walking, riding a bike or scooter, asking a friend or coworker to give you a ride, or hailing a taxi, Uber, and Lyft. If you accept this challenge, we will publicly recognize you for doing so via media advisory on Monday. We will also highlight your participation through social media and mentions in our newsletter, which reaches over 9,000 people. The Mecklenburg County and City of Charlotte agencies who we are partnering with will also share your participation via their communication channels. If you are willing to accept this challenge, please reply to one of my emails. Again, my name is Hope Wright, so you can find me in your inbox. Please send this by the end of the week so that we can include you in our media advisory on Monday and answer any questions you have. Again, this is an opportunity for you to show the community that you are willing to better understand the experiences and the challenges of living without the option of driving, which is a daily reality for more than 25,000 households in Mecklenburg County. And also that you are invested in improving public transportation, walking, and biking infrastructure. Thank you, and special thanks to those of you who have already taken up this challenge, so Mayor Clark and Mayor Knox as well. Thank you very much, and several other members, non-voting members. Thank you. All right, Andre.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andre Phillips. I'm currently a junior at Davidson College. I'm an English major, but I'm here because I'm very passionate about transportation, and this past summer I got to do an internship at Sustain Charlotte. And through that internship, I got to interview people who rely on the bus as their main way of getting around and tell their story. And the hope is to share these stories with you all, because oftentimes people who ride the bus or use public transit are sort of invisible and we kind of forget about them. So the hope for these stories is to make them visible again and emphasize that people do ride the bus and people do rely on the bus. And so some of the main takeaways from those stories I had were very interesting. One was that people who ride the bus are actually very flexible, contrary to what you would believe. They're able to bend their lives around the schedule of the bus, and they're able to get around through that. The stories revealed that the bus is sort of this place for compassion, this place where people get together to get around. And so it's a really beautiful vehicle for community, and improving that space for people to get around all together and then get together because they can get around would be an amazing addition to the Charlotte area and already exists. And finally, the final takeaway is that the bus, even though it already is good in many ways for getting people around, does need many improvements, and it will take a lot of perseverance to make those improvements. And so some of those are, one of the biggest ones is higher frequency, especially on weekends, and updating the CATS Pass to have more details to help people who are new to the area or new riders to learn the system better. And so even though not everybody rides the bus, there's still a lot of people who rely on it. And so major investment will be needed for those who currently use it, and improving the system for those who currently use it will improve it for future users, which will then improve life for everyone in the Charlotte area in ways we just have to discover. And so an investment in the bus is an investment in everyone who needs to or will need to get around the Charlotte area. Thank you. And also, I'm just wondering, here are the booklets here. Who should I give these to so that they could be distributed to members of the board? All right, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I appreciate both speakers so much, and especially the theme about our buses. You really did come at the perfect moment, because tonight we're doing a deep dive on our buses and on what we can do and what we should be doing to improve it. So you really did come at the right moment. If I could have handpicked, speakers for tonight's theme, I would have chosen you. So thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could add, Hope and Andre, thank you guys so much. We did this once already for any of my constituents that are out there, anybody in the North Meck area. On October 3rd, we're going to be taking the express bus into Charlotte again, like we did a couple of months ago, with our sustainability team from the town of Davidson, as well as a group of students from Davidson College that are sustainability champions, as well as Hope. And hopefully this time when we convene at Waterbean Coffee, my bank account's not $500,000 overdrawn like it was last time, so.
Good times. Thank you, Mayor Knox. All right, we will now turn to the interim chief executive officer report. Mr. Cagle.
Yes, thank you. So I have a lot of things to go through tonight. I will start with some of the information that we provided at your seats. The first is a memo. Each of you should have received one of these. If you don't have one, let us know and we'll give it to, provide it for you. This is a response to a question from last month related to historic ridership levels separated between bus and rail. I will note that this reflects NTD, or National Transit Database data, and is consistent with how we report to the FTA. Now, I will note, and the memo discusses this, there are multiple valid methodologies for gathering ridership data, and we use all three of them: farebox, automated passenger, or APC counts, and then sampling. NTD data for bus is based on sampling. And so as you look at the different passenger reports that we provide to you, we try to always specify which method we are utilizing. Each method, all of the methods are valid, but they have different strengths and weaknesses. But I did want to make sure that it's clear that this data is NTD-based data, or the same data for NTD. The second, I'll call it a slip sheet. We realize that the sales tax report for this month, the numbers are all correct in the packet, but the headers were incorrect. So we have corrected that so that the numbers and the headers all align. Again, the version included in your packet, all of the numbers were correct, but the headers were not updated. So this is a corrected version of that for this month in the monthly statistics. With that, I'd like to announce a few things. Red Line Commuter Rail Public Meeting Series. At your seats, you should have all received a flyer that we've been distributing. Beginning September 30th, a series of in-person and virtual meetings CATS will hold as public meetings, and we would encourage everyone, the members of the MTC and your constituents, to attend if you would like these public meetings. Also wanted to announce the City of Charlotte received an Innovative Finance and Asset Concession Grant Award. This is, we were notified from Build America Bureau on September 17th, 2024, that the City of Charlotte had received a $1 million expert services grant from the Innovative Finance and Asset Concession Grant Program. This new program, authorized by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, assists public entities in exploring innovative financing and delivery opportunities. The Expert Services Grant will explore opportunities to leverage public and private funding for the Charlotte Gateway Station. Also, upcoming, the week of Sunday, October 6th, will start a week of Customer Appreciation and Trying Transit Week. So the week of October 6th, running through October 12th, this week will be kicked off by the opening of STS Plus in Mint Hill. And it will represent a week of fare-free for transit for our riders. Also, I'd like to make it clear that just as in the past, this year we will also offer free rides on Election Day, Tuesday, November 5th. That has been our norm, and we will continue that. With that, I will then turn to page 15 of your packet to talk through our summary of monthly statistics. A few more items of note. Better Bus will have additional meetings throughout the fall, but there will be some public engagement on September 26th. As I mentioned before, September 30th, October 3rd, and 8th and 10th will be public engagement for the Red Line. Gold Line, we will be starting public engagement with exact dates coming this fall. So we will provide you those exact dates as we identify those. City of Charlotte Community Area Planning Workshops will be held this fall, September through November, and CATS will have a table or will participate in those. Additionally, we will be participating and sharing information in the community at a variety of events ranging from Biketoberfest to, as Mayor Knox pointed out, a second Rise and Ride event. We'll also kick off our Ride with Music series at the J.W. Clay Station, and we'll participate at UNC Charlotte Transportation Fair. These are just a few of these things. We wanted to include these so that you all hear from us what are the events and activities that we're conducting out in the community. With that, I'll turn to the safety summary. In summary, Bus Operations Division in August, there were 4 vehicle accidents. 2 of these accidents involved buses making accidental contact with either a bollard or a utility pole. There were no injuries reported from either of those accidents. 2 additional accidents involved buses making accidental contact with cars, again resulting in minor damage but no injuries. STS and paratransit, there were no incidents to report in August, and the rail division, there were no incidents to report in August as well, Gold Line and Blue Line. Ridership summary. In August, 81.3% of bus services were on time. Again, that's slightly below where we would like to be at 85% or greater, and we will continue to work to make improvements in those numbers. Ridership highlights, total system ridership increased by 7% compared to August 2023, with an 8.7% increase in local bus, 9.2% decrease in local express. However, that's attributable to one less service day. Regional express also saw a decrease, same reason. The community circulators showed an increase of 7.8%. STS showed an increase of 7.1%. Van Pool showed a 3.9% decrease. Blue Line was a 3.2% increase, and the Gold Line was a 33% increase in ridership for the month. So, why was that? The next highlight is on August 17th and 18th, the city celebrated Pride. That led to very large weekends both on the Gold and Blue Lines. We saw ridership on August 17th for the Gold Line was 46% higher than the month's average Saturday. And Blue Line experienced a ridership increase of 45% above the month's average Saturday as well. So again, we do see ridership increasing across all segments, but we also know that special events can significantly increase or drive ridership increases for the month. It was requested to provide an update on the truck overhauls. So where we are now, of 44 sets, just over half remain for complete overhaul. 8 are out for repair with 8 available for service. So there is a table in the summary that breaks that down. CAT Series 1 and 2, there are 21 total truck sets. 5 have not started or received any repairs. 8 are out for repair, and 8 have been received back with either with some level of repairs. CAT Series 3, we have not started sending the Series 3 trucks yet because we are prioritizing the Series 1 and 2 trucks, which are the oldest vehicles or truck sets in the fleet. So that's why you see that those have not even started. We're prioritizing 1 and 2s. And once we are moved through those, we will then progress on to the Series 3. In your packet, pages 17 through 30 is the detailed monthly statistics. I'd be happy to answer any questions if the MTC has those. That is it. Oh, there is one more thing. As we move into our first action item of the evening, which are the rules of procedures, I did want to point out one last thing. Mr. Thomas will be talking about the changes necessary to the rules of procedure. These changes are required due to the amended ILA, which was approved next month. But I will also point out that the new ILA creates a new Public Transit Advisory Committee. That committee will need to be stood up effective January 1st, 2025. The appointment structure is similar to the CTAG, or Community Transit Advisory Group, which has 13 members. All towns have one appointment. The Mecklenburg County and the City of Charlotte also will appoint the co-chairs of, or each chair, the co-chairs of the new committee. CMS has a appointment. City Council and Mecklenburg County Board each have 2 appointments. And to the extent possible, committee members should exhibit diversity of riders and the services that we provide, i.e. they should be riders who utilize a diversity of our services. As we go through this, we are prepared to set up an application process should the MTC wish us to do that, so that we can take and gather applications for review and ultimately consideration by the MTC ahead of January.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell, who represents District 6, Matthews, Mint Hill, and Pineville, and the ETJ in the South. Thank you for being here. Okay, that was a really detailed update. Let's start with questions in the room, and then we'll go online. Anybody? How about anyone online? Okay. While you think about it, I will ask a few. I appreciate the update on the repair of the trains. I remember when it was determined that the all the trucks needed to be repaired or have this overhaul, that the number that would be pulled out of service left you with just exactly what you need to make service.
Yes.
And so how is that going? Because you haven't had any extra to spare. It's been, I don't know how many months now, but functionally, how is that going?
Yeah, so at the time, you'll recall, at the request of NCDOT, SSO, CATS, in effect, grounded the 100, or the 100 and 200, or the 1 and 2 series vehicles or their trucks. 8 of those have returned and have been put back in service. At the time, that left us just enough vehicles to provide service. We were able to manage through that. And I'm happy to announce that now we do have a little more breathing room in that those 8 sets that have been returned are able to go back into service.
And are they going to Florida to be repaired? Is that what ended up happening?
Both. And so some go to Florida. All go to Florida and California, but the repairs are slightly different at each location. And so some have been to Florida and California already, and some have been to Florida and will still go to California.
All right, and if you had to estimate when you think it'll be completed, what's that estimate now?
Well, right now, let me provide you a more detailed answer from our railcar maintenance group on that.
Okay, and how's it going with the speeds being lowered and capped? Are we still, is that still status quo?
It is. So there are several operating restrictions in place. I mentioned the 1 and 2 series vehicles being taken out of revenue service. Once those vehicles have been maintained, they automatically can go back into service. We don't have to request anything further. The other operating restrictions, like the 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, we do anticipate being ready to discuss with NCDOT SSO early next calendar year the possibility of removing or revising the speed restriction. What I would say today is under current operating parameters, the headways that we have, the frequencies that we have, the 35-mile-an-hour speed limit is not impacting it. We're able to make service per the schedule. But as we see ridership increase and we would like to reduce headways or increase frequencies, that's where the 35-mile-an-hour speed restriction could become more difficult, and we hope to be able to have conversations with NCDOT SSO about removing that restriction early next calendar year.
Okay. And finally, have you had any issues with the heat strips, or do they continue to read in a safe level?
Yeah, they continue to read. So we have protocols. If a heat strip does read over the designated temperature, it's taken out. The trucks are examined more thoroughly. And if it's deemed acceptable, they can be put back into service with new heat strips, or they will be taken out of service and put into the queue for sending to Florida and California. That process is working. And again, as we receive trucks back that have been serviced, we become better and better because the heat strips are really the method for identifying where to the main bearing in the axle. I'll also say we continue to work with Siemens. You may recall another strategy that we implemented with Siemens is we are installing a vibration detection system in the axle. It literally listens to the axle for vibration or sounds from wear on the bearing. That project is underway. We have installed one of the new devices on a vehicle, and we are working with Siemens to beta test and calibrate that system. Once that system is in place fully across the fleet, it will be, in effect, a better method for detecting wear on these vehicle axles.
Thank you. All right, and just, I think probably everybody knows this, but pursuant to the ILA, we are essentially merging CTAG and TSAC, which, right?
The ILA, so just to make sure we're saying the same thing, the ILA discontinues the CTAG and TSAC and creates the PTAC. So it's not just a simple merger of the two groups into one with a new name. It is truly a new group being created.
Okay, great. I think that probably is going to be beneficial for efficiencies. Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a comment about
Yes, sir,
that,
please.
if I may. I think this new organization or this new committee kind of violates the spirit in which we asked for the merger. I don't know if you remember this, but Ms. Oshlin, when she initially made a motion to study this, she made it with the idea in mind that we as groups were both overlapping, at least to some degree, in functions. I think it was really more an issue of function creep, where we were not taking, but we were sort of adding on some of TSAC's duties to our group, and TSAC themselves were adding some of their duties to their group. So she had made that motion with the understanding that, we had at least somewhat overlapping functions. We didn't need as big of a board or we didn't need two separate boards for it. But looking at the way this new board will be structured, it looks like that it essentially takes two boards and combines them into one without any additional membership. And I think that's going to add some additional strain to the board. The second thing she asked for was consideration for a vote on MTC for the group, and that looks like it was completely ignored. She also asked, I remember this, it was for an actual study, and I don't remember ever seeing any sort of results being published for a study or anything like that. Maybe I missed it, but it just seems like this was more of an ad hoc, answer to her question rather than a serious, thoughtful consideration of all the proposals she had made. And so like I said, I don't think this new committee fits in the spirit. And I just want to let everyone know I'm speaking from my own perspective here, not from the board's, not from CTAG's perspective or TSAC's perspective, but as the co-chairman of CTAG, this is what I see.
I appreciate you bringing that forward. Mr. Cagle, or to anyone who has been involved in the process, can you shed light on this? Because this is the first feedback I'm hearing to this effect. So I, do need assistance in responding to it. Or can someone shed light on the process of,
There was a process for all of the members of the MTC to come together and negotiate the new ILA, which was completed, and each member, with the exception of Matthews, approved the ILA, and it was approved last month by this group, not unanimously, but approved. I guess that would be the input that I can provide to you related to this. I was not part of that renegotiation of the ILA.
One thing that, I'm trying to think back on is when is the last time I've heard this input? And I mean, when did Ms. Exlin leave?
This was, I think she left about a year and a half ago. This was kind of one of her parting shots with this board. And like I said, and forgive me, I may be a little hazy on the details, but these were the things that I remember from her request. And my thought process was going into this was that it would be studied, the results would be distributed, and I don't know what methodology, we would use to study such a thing, but at least there would be some sort of effort made to actually study the issue, and then those results would be brought back, and we'd have some time for discussion. And the first thing I hear about this is in the CTAG meeting last week that this has already been decided and it's in the new interlocal agreement. And Mr. Cagle, I didn't mean to put you on the spot about this. I just thought about this after we had had this meeting, and I kind of mulled it over. So apologies if I'm putting you on the spot here, but I think that
That's okay. Candor's always important and welcome. I think
Can I
probably,
speak to
yes, ma'am.
this, since
Go right ahead.
The managers were the ones that negotiated the revised interlocal. What I can tell you is that this is not a topic that we ever talked about. I think the city, when they were trying to align the ILA with the rules of procedure, they came forward with a lot of revisions to make sure that everything was aligned. And as part of that, the proposal to consolidate, or to use your terms, Brent, to disband the two and bring forward a new one, I think it was just trying to reflect what I think everybody thought was what was wanted. But there was never any negotiation between any of us about whether or not it should or shouldn't happen. It just kind of appeared in the draft, and we went forward with it, so.
Well, yes,
So
ma'am.
can I also,
Sure, Mr. Herms, go ahead.
hi, so I am going to so I'll preface saying I'm not speaking on behalf of TSAC, but more so me as a person who happens to sit as chair, but then also as Ms. Eslin's successor as chair. And this is also with me and her having these conversations kind of one-on-one kind of during last year, during my time as vice chair under her as chair. First of all, I will say that Mr. Parker's assessment on Ms. Exlin's comments is very accurate. It is to the, so I will say it is spot on to the tune of what she kind of mentioned. And one of the things that both of us kind of mentioned as chair and vice chair in a prior TSAC meeting last year was one is having a vote of approval of the exploring the merger of the two, but then also kind of allowing members of TSAC and CTAC to be able to provide input as far as what could this new entity be, or at a minimum, at least the chairs / vice chairs / co-chairs of the two entities. And again, at the end of the day, yes, we have two separate, right now we're two separate bodies that are very overlapping. It makes sense to have the one, but kind of, but to Mr. Parker's comment, it does, it definitely differs a bit from the spirit of what Ms. Echelon kind of called for. And I do also kind of curious as far as like as far as the interlocal agreement, the majority of it makes absolutely perfect sense. But as far as the new kind of PTAC entity, essentially, who kind of was it within the I guess not negotiate, but at least the thought process of kind of creating it, or was it kind of more so just, okay, we have these two groups, we'll just do this, we'll just merge into one, we'll use C tags, appointing authority roles, and it'll be a 13 member body. So that is something that I am curious about. I'm sure Mr. Parker's also has expressed that as well.
Okay, Mayor Lyles.
Thank you for the opportunity to hear what you've said. I agree that we thought that we perhaps had an opportunity to make a board that had overlaps being issues, but I think instead of us trying to guess what we're doing, I think we should pull up the paper, the notes of what we've had and the requests that we've had, so that we'd be able to take a look at it so that we can accurately address the questions that you're having. I know that there have been these committees for a long time. A lot of people have served on them, and they have a lot of guidance for us. And I think that that's something so if it would be okay, I think if we could have the team or cats pull up some of the information about it and have the ability to understand, so that we can have a better discussion with information shared by everyone.
And just to provide some clarification, I was under no illusions that this would be a board composed of one-for-one membership from each of the two boards combined. I think that'd be a little unwieldy. Mm-hmm. But I think basically consolidating two boards into one board and essentially cutting the membership in half, I think that adds a little bit more responsibilities than what I was envisioning would occur. And again, I think the biggest thing for me is just I do not remember seeing any sort of results of any study or even anything being talked about it. I was just reading through the through the new interlocal agreement, and there it was, and I was like, oh well, that's nice. You know, it kind of it felt like we put it into a black box and then waited for a year and a half, and then just reached our hand into the black box and pulled out, and here's what we have now, rather than a thoughtful process about how to combine these two boards and figure out ways to maximize efficiencies between the two.
It probably is like that box, as you say, but I think that we have to figure out what that document is in the box and be able to have some context for all of us so that we're all working from the same information. And I think that that's a viable idea to do that, and would suggest that that although we have an LLC, we have the new agreement now, we are perhaps in a position that we may have to figure out how to fix something a little bit differently, but at the same time, be able to move forward with where we are now. So I would just say that if we could have the information and have the staff do some research on it and give us some ideas, give us some of the things about how other organizations or other systems do this work, then we would have a better conversation and more, I think, a conversation that would address the issues that you've raised. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Lyles, and I think those comments are very well received. Mr. Attorney, we have to take action with respect to the ILA, which of course has been approved by all the boards, and we'll have to understand how we got to the process of having every single town board, the city and the county, vote on the ILA, and I feel like this is the first sort of objection I'm hearing throughout this process. So that's a procedural and process miss, but here we are. So my question to you is, if we need to go forward with the action item, what would be can we vote to amend, any piece of the new board after we meet, and we can try to be as responsive as possible? Like, how do we amend this to the extent we're able after the fact?
Okay, excuse me. So you're right, Commissioner Altman, about the ILA is effective now, right? And so the ILA created the PTAC, the Public Transit Advisory Committee. So that's in effect. We have the rules of procedure before you tonight, and we're asking approval so that the rules of procedure can marry up with our new interlocal agreement that is now effective. In terms of the rules of procedure, if we wanted to make changes to those, we could. And so that would be the opportunity for us to tinker with the 13-member committee if we wanted to do so. I would say that if we're trying to meet that January 1st, 2025 deadline to establish and set up this PTAC, this new committee, that the sooner we do that, the better. And so if we drag that out, it'll make it really hard for us to appoint the members to the new PTAC committee.
Okay,
So,
then.
But we could do that. We could tinker with it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Could I offer another option? The prior interlocal agreement that we had that was drafted decades ago was amended in 2005 or something like that.
That's right.
So there's nothing that prohibits us from amending this document at a later date, even if it's in December, prior to the January deadline for the PTAG that we've created. We still have that opportunity to amend it, am I correct?
That's right. So if you wanted to amend the interlocal agreement,
Right.
you could. It's just a matter of taking it to their respective boards and getting your boards to approve it.
I just don't want to sidetrack the rules of procedure that we're going to talk about tonight. I think these are two different issues for me, so.
Yeah, all right, so we had 9 members on one and 13 members on the other. Is that correct originally?
So let me add this too.
Because I want to know a little bit more about what's our baseline that we're talking about here.
It's my understanding, and this is just from looking through some documents and some history, that the TSAC was actually a committee of the Charlotte City Council, and it carried over. And when they established the interlocal agreement in 1999, they created CTAG. So CTAG has been, ever since that time, and there were actually 2 committees. But the interlocal didn't create 2 distinct committees, is my understanding, that the CTAG was really created. And so when they established the interlocal, they established that CTAG committee.
Well, we don't want to amend that.
Again, I guess the 9 and the 13, in some respects, I think that is a lot. I don't know many of our boards that have that kind of number in terms of members and participation. But I think what's important, and I think that Mayor Knox said it, is that we're in a position where we really need to address the issue of how we do this. And I think that we've got a recommendation on our table, on our agenda now, to approve our documents to move forward. I'm not sure how much of a codification needs to be done in a document like that for an advisory committee. I mean, we have planning committees and all kinds of committees, and they really are basically advisory committees that we could make some determination on our own, I would assume. I guess that's the question, Brad. And if we're looking at some of these questions like, well, we want to have this committee, but we're not sure exactly how we're shaping it or framing it and the responsibilities. But could that be a separate item that we could generate from the board or from the MTC members of what we would like to do? How important is it to codify it in the document even further? I think that's my question.
Well, I think it's important that we, describe the process for how what we have to make up the committee, right? So we have to how many members and who appoints those members and what is their function, what do they do? And so it's important to have that process in the rules of procedure so we know how to follow it and we know how to establish it. And, define their terms and that sort of thing. And so that's what we have in the rules of procedure. If you recall, our old rules of procedure had the two committees in there, had the TSAC and the CTAG. And so the reason that we're before you tonight with the rules of procedure, that's one of the issues. We need to consolidate that so it marries up with the new interlocal agreement. And then there's a few other changes as well that are necessitated by the new ILA. But we could make further changes if we needed to.
So does it make more sense to vote to approve the procedures tonight with the understanding that within 30 days, I would love to meet with you. I would like to be there, anyone from the MTC and staff, so that we can see what we can do to be responsive and bring that back and amend a piece of the procedures if needed? Or is it better to defer action on the procedures tonight, which is cleaner or easier or whatever?
Right. I mean, really, we could, I think tonight, one of the, I guess from a critical path standpoint, it was just trying to get the rules of procedure to line up with the interlocal agreement. And that would be a good thing if we could do that, because for our next meeting, if we didn't do that, we'd be still under the old rules of procedure. So it's probably good to go ahead and do that.
Okay.
And then bring back another change to it if we can.
To the procedures, okay.
Right.
All right, then. We sort of jumped the gun a little bit on the presentation of the amended rules and procedure. And so why don't we formally do that so you can cover the other changes?
Sure.
And then we can perhaps pass it and then understand if you're amenable, you and Mr. Herms, to meet with me and anyone else who would like to over the next 30 days and see what we can bring forward.
Yes, absolutely. I don't want to speak on behalf of Mr. Herms, although I would like to have him there present with me so we can
That'd be great.
discuss our concerns together. Apologies for throwing this little rock into the water. I wasn't here for the May MTC meeting, which I think is when this was presented. If I'm not mistaken, I had a work commitment, so apologies for bringing this up 4 months.
No, do not
post-
apologize. Yeah, like I said, there's clearly a process issue that something that was raised a year and a half ago didn't sort of hit anyone's radar while we were approving this. So there's definitely a process issue here that we need to figure out. But that being said, why don't we sort of formally undertake this action item C? Mr. Thomas.
Yeah, so aside from the consolidation of the TSAC and the CTAG, the rules of procedure also, our old rules of procedure had some sections in there regarding the MTC regional members and the qualifications to be a regional member. It also had some language in there about appointing regional participants, and that language was really better, more appropriate for the interlocal agreement, because the interlocal agreement, tells us who is a member and how to become a member and those sort of things. And so that really wasn't appropriate for the rules of procedure. So we took those two things out because those things also were modified slightly in the new ILA. So we removed those two sections. And then there's also some changes throughout the rules of procedure for nomenclature. So for instance, the rules of procedure referred to the CAT CEO as the chief transit official. We just made it CAT CEO. And there was some also changes from chairman to chair, and things like that. The other two changes that are noted here in the staff summary have to do with remote participation. And so we had some questions over the years on remote participation. And basically what we did in the rules of procedure said that you had to be present to count for a quorum and also to vote. But if you're just participating, you can do so remotely. So we just codified that piece of it. And then there was, the last section was with respect to the public address. We put a phone number in there that's accurate and an email address. So folks that want to sign up for a public address, they can do so. And that is in there now too. So that's kind of a summary of those changes.
Thank you. Any questions in the room? Any online? At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
All right, a motion having been made and seconded. All those in favor? I just want to make sure I use the right language. Is it just to approve the MTC rules of procedure? Please raise your hand. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. And I will ask staff if you can please coordinate reaching out to our CTAG and TSAC folks and coordinate with, I know Mayor Knox and I, and if anyone else would like to now raise your hand or follow up, let us know if you'd like to be included. Thank you. All right. Second action item is the transit advertising and sponsorship policy. Mr. Thomas.
Okay, so we are here before you tonight asking to modify a section of our advertising and sponsorship policy. That policy has a provision in there that prohibits sponsorships with alcohol companies. And so we are asking tonight to modify that slightly so that we would permit a sponsorship with an alcohol company in the narrow instance of the language that's in the action item. And so that would permit sponsorships with alcohol companies that are allowed for the limited purpose of promoting public transit as a safe alternative to impaired driving or riding with a driver who is impaired. A sponsoring entity may make payments to CATS so that the Safe Ride program could be provided fare-free to our riders during a defined period, so to speak. So this would be a situation where, for instance, if an alcohol company wanted to sponsor a fare-free evening so that you could take transit home that evening or, for a defined period of time. And this would let us do that in that narrow instance that promotes safe rides and is aimed at preventing impaired driving. So
We're not going to shrink wrap the trains in Buffalo Trace logo or something like that, are we?
that's right.
So an oddity, not an oddity, but the reason to clean this up is we do allow advertising with alcohol companies, and there are many ads for alcohol that are on transit vehicles. What this really is, sort of in layman's term, is if an alcohol company wants to sponsor free transit on New Year's Eve, for example, Safe Ride Home programs, this allows us to do it because a Safe Ride Home program is not an advertising, it is a sponsorship. And so we had to clarify, we're asking for consideration to clarify the policy to allow for sponsorships in that limited scope.
Thank you for the clarification. Comments in the room?
I think one of the best things about our system is that it allows people not to drive a car while they're drinking. And this, to me, is just one more way of ensuring that we're keeping people more safe and as they have entertainment and all of the things in our community. So I'd like to move that we adopt the recommendation that's presented by the team.
Second.
Any further comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And then the motion passes. All right, we will now turn to informational items with, beginning with Jason Lawrence, October service changes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the MTC. Tonight, I'll be presenting to you the changes that will go into effect with our October 7th service change. Just as a reminder, we do 3 service changes a year. We do one in February, one in June, and one in October. This change that we are presenting to you is what we consider a minor change. This did not require any Title VI analysis, but we did hold some public outreach with the Greer Heights community to talk about the changes that I'll talk with you tonight. Next slide. And some of those changes are route-based, some are more scheduling-based, and some are some of the improvements that we're working with our Independence Busway that opened in late August of just the past month. The routing change we'll focus on will be the Route 15 Randolph Road. We have a number of changes for routes that serve the Independence Busway, and then we have some minor adjustments on some of the schedules and some enhancements, particularly to the Route 60 Tyvola Road route, which I'll talk about in a minute. Next slide. So in the Greer Heights community, next slide, There are a number of services that serve that community. We have the Route 39, which is what we call a crosstown route that connects the Gura Heights community with the Old Concord Road Lynx Blue Line Station. Travels along primarily along Eastway Drive. We also have the Route 15 Randolph Road, which serves uptown Charlotte, along Randolph Road, Gura Heights, and then ends in the Cotswold area. And then just on the fringes of that neighborhood, we have the Route 27 Monroe Road route that serves Elizabeth, 7th Street, Monroe Road, and actually goes all the way to John Street into the town of Matthews. Next slide. As we look at the ridership within that area, we see that we do have some pockets of high ridership along the Mecklenburg County Health Department site off of Billingsley Road, and some other high ridership locations along Sam Drenham. And within this neighborhood, our boardings range from right around 1 average boarding a day to a high of 36 average boardings a day, mostly around the health center. Next slide. But as we, continue looking at our routes to find ways to operate more efficiently and more safely, and as we are also seeing areas where we're seeing higher growth or seeing a lot of new development, particularly in neighborhoods that are closer in to the uptown area of Charlotte, Gura Heights is seeing some of that change too. So we are seeing a number of streets that are becoming tighter due to a lot of people parking on street in that area as more housing is developed in that community. That's what you see there on the image in front of you from along Orange Street. We also have a curve at Rodman and Wheatley that our operations group has shared with us that they feel is unsafe at times, and they've had some maneuvering that during ice or during like overgrown foliage where there's been issues with the buses having to not operate safely along that curve. Next slide. So we went out to the Gura Heights community to talk about all the services within there and zeroed in on the change that we have in front of you on the screen now, which was to make a routing change to the Route 15, to reroute it from the tight turn at Rodman Street and Wheatley Avenue and reroute it there, as you see there highlighted in red, to Birkeland Drive and Bunch Drive streets. Next slide. And so what does that mean to the actual people who use the service each and every day? That we will have to relocate a number of bus stops to do that. And so we have went out to each of one of these bus stops and put a detailed map, just like you see here, and color-coded it with numbers to also detail the distances individuals will have to walk to for their changes. And it does shift the walk distance from a low of 130 feet to just over 400 feet within the community. And as is our practice with these kinds of changes, on the day of the change, we will have people out there to assist customers with any concerns that they have. And we will have communicated with Gura Heights community leadership that we are making this change, and will continue to engage with Gura Heights with any other changes that we see as possibilities for their community. Next slide. So the busway, next slide, opened in late August. There's just a recap. We have come to you and talked about the routes that operate along the Independence Corridor. We did spend some dollars to improve the busway so that it can open for operations, and we did that in late August. It's just over 5 miles from length from uptown Charlotte to just past Wallace Road. And there are a number of entrance points, Hawthorne Lane, Albemarle Road, and Wallace Lane are where you can actually access the corridor. And we have 5 routes that serve that. 2 that go out to the Mint Hill and Harrisburg area, 1 out to Union County, and 1 down to the town of Matthews. Next slide.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah.
Just to clarify, the Independence busway, these are dedicated lanes each direction, center running down Independence,
Yeah,
correct?
that's correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, there's a barrier like roughly from, let's say, Albemarle Road in, and then outside of that to Wallace Lane, it's just a painted stripe along Independence Boulevard, and are dedicated at this point only for bus usage. So we have seen already some significant travel time savings with this corridor. Pre-busway, you see there from like where we were this time roughly last year, our buses were on-time performance combined around 68% on time for the schedule. And so at just a few months in, we are at 82% on-time performance for those routes. So we'll continue to monitor and look at that and match the schedule to the travel times that we are seeing. And we'll see some of those changes come into place on October 7th. But we're still seeing some delays in our uptown Charlotte area, and we'll continue to monitor that to see where we can find additional on-time performance improvements. Next slide. So as we look to the October change, we were able, with those travel time savings, to add additional service to the Route 64X Independence Boulevard that serves the Sam Newell Park and Ride there off Independence Point Parkway in the town of Matthews, as well as a park and ride in downtown Matthews. And so we will add an additional trip in the morning and 2 extra trips in the afternoon so that we have a balance of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. trips for that community. For 40X Lawyer Road and 46 Harrisburg Road, we'll include some improvements to align the frequency so that if you're at the Albemarle Road Park and Ride, that you have a bus coming every 20 to 30 minutes. So we've worked the schedule so that they're both not arriving at the same time, so we can effectively improve the frequency for that park and ride. And so we also made some runtime improvements for the 52X Ottawa Road and 74X Union County service. But we're going to keep looking at this. As we see those improvements, we'll continue to monitor schedule and make adjustments as needed for future service changes. Next slide. So we have a number of other improvements that we're looking to make in October. We're improving the weekday frequency on the Sprinter service that serves the airport along Wilkinson Boulevard to every 25 minutes from 30 minutes. And we've seen some higher boardings in the evenings at the airport due to some shift times. And so we're adding an extra trip in the evening to accommodate those high passenger loads. Route 60 Tyvola Road serves the Tyvola Blue Line station, but also serves the airport and serves the VA Center off of Tyvola Road. So we're adjusting some of the weekday trips to align with the clinic opening at 7 a.m. So if somebody has an appointment at 7 a.m., they'll be able to get there on time prior to October 7th. If you had a 7 a.m. appointment, you would not be able to make it there because the bus wouldn't go there at that time. So that was a direct comment from some of our customers on that. So we made that change and look forward to having that occur on October 7th. Route 34 Freedom Drive, that serves the Philip O'Berry campus and some other communities along the Freedom Drive corridor, and we're improving the connections at that campus to align with the bell times. So that's one thing that we're looking at, where we do have good service at campuses, making sure that the scheduled time lines up with the bell time. So that's been part of our ongoing conversation with CMS, and we will continue to look at schools to where we can make those enhancements. And then as our ongoing improvements on time, every schedule change, we make some adjustments to improve on-time performance. And you can see there with routes 23, 24, 28, and 43, we're making some adjustments to improve on-time performance. Next slide. And so as stated, service change will take place on October 7th, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much. Okay, questions in the room?
I got a quick one. Jason, and excuse my ignorance, because this may be something that we've had provided to us before, but do we have numbers as far as the number of CMS kids that actually are using bus or rail to go to and from school?
Yeah, we have it in a number of ways. We do sell passes. Some campuses do buy passes in bulk, and we can share that detail. We do have a number of campuses that have better service than others, given their location. East Meck is a good example there off of Monroe Road, the Philip O'Berry campus. But that is something we don't have like an exact number of if they're there, but we do have anecdotal information around bus stops at those campuses. And we have been working with CMS to get to the bottom of like how many of their students actually use the service. But we can look into that information for you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Just mild curiosity, do you have any idea if ridership on the bus services that use the Independence busway has increased? If so, has that been substantial, modest? Just looking for some information.
Sure. Well, it's as stated, Mr. Cagle stated in our ridership report, we did see some declines in our express routes and throughout the month of September. The month of August and into September. And so we'll continue to evaluate that, and we'll be sure we can report that. At this point, it's probably too early to tell if the ridership is going to go up, but I think as we continue to market and improve the service, add those extra trips, I think we'll see some improvements.
Anybody online who would like to ask a question? All right, I just want to pull up again the slide that says travel time savings. And if that's hard, it's not super critical, but I just think that's really important and interesting. I think it was a 20% improvement, and that's really significant. So that bodes well for some of what we're going to be talking about. And also, I'm really happy to hear the discussion around scheduling around the bell time for CMS schools where you have a stop nearby. And I, again, just want to let the community know that CATS and CMS have been working diligently month every single month, I think like 8 months now, we've been doing this, making progress. And so we often hear people decry folks working in silos. And so I really do just want to give you a shout out for being so intentional to not do that. And I know y'all are making great progress, and I look forward to when we can hear about it.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other questions on this informational item, then we will move to the next one, which is BRT. And is that Mr. Okay.
Ms. Goforth will.
Thank you, Ms. Goforth.
Good evening. At the request of the MTC, we've asked two transit experts with HNTB to provide an overview of Bus Rapid Transit, or BRT, key features and examples of successful BRT projects in the U.S. We have two BRT experts today with us, Mark Huffer and Mila Bizhanskaya. Mark has over 35 years of experience in the transit industry, having worked for 6 different transit agencies. His experience includes all facets of transit operations, as well as multiple modes of transit, including bus and paratransit, bus rapid transit, light rail, and streetcar. Prior to joining HNTB, Mark served as general manager and CEO of the Kansas City Transportation Authority for nearly 14 years, where he oversaw implementation of that system's first 2 BRT corridors. For HNTB, Mark has worked on BRT projects in Raleigh, Kansas City, Tulsa, Jacksonville, and San Antonio, among others, and he serves as HNTB's National BRT Practice Leader. He's the immediate past chair of the American Public Transportation Association's BRT Committee. Mila is the senior project manager with 17 years of experience in public transportation, specializing in transportation planning, program management, federal grants, and policy. Throughout her career, she's played key roles in advancing BRT projects, including advancing the US 52 BRT feasibility study in Charleston, managing the Wake BRT program in Raleigh, and advancing the North-South BRT in Chapel Hill. Her career spans multiple leadership roles, including leading the Planning and Sustainability Department at the Jacksonville Transportation Authority. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Huffer.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Madam Chair, members of the MTC, we're very happy to be here today and have the opportunity to talk about BRT. It's something that I love to do, and which is probably why I don't get invited to a lot of parties, because I talk about BRT all the time. But today what we're going to talk a little bit about is put some parameters and definitions around BRT. What is BRT? And then Mila will talk specifically about some transit-oriented development and economic development as it relates to BRT stations. So when I go around the country and talk about BRT, I get asked this question all the time: what is BRT? And my answer generally is, it's whatever you want it to be. And I say that because there are probably close to 100 BRT lines in the country that are in operation or in some level of planning or engineering or construction. And they range from very simple BRT, low-cost lines that operate curbside to very complicated, very sophisticated BRT that operates in interstate. And everything in between, and every one of those is called BRT. It's really what a community wants to use for BRT. And that's part of the beauty of BRT, is its flexibility, its ability to be different things in different communities, also within a corridor itself, because it can adjust to specific land uses, densities, municipal and state policies. That aside, there are certain elements of BRT that are found in almost all BRT systems, and that includes elements such as unique branding, enhanced stations, and we'll talk about this in more detail, but this is very much related, very similar to a light rail type of station, off-board fare collection, again, similar to rail, extended hours, and specialized vehicles. And in fact, FTA requires these elements, many of these elements, to be part of a BRT project to qualify for capital investment grant funding, or CIG. CIG is the most common form of federal funding for BRT. Not the only one, but certainly the most common. Just to show you how much BRT has grown in popularity, this is the pipeline for capital improvement grants from the FTA. In 2008, there were 7 BRT projects represented in the green on the pie chart on the left, which is about 25% of the projects in the federal pipeline for funding. By 2023, that had grown to 37 different BRT projects, or almost 65% of the total number of projects requesting federal funding in CIG. Now, again, the dollar values for rail are still going to be higher because rail is more expensive, but just in terms of sheer numbers of projects, BRT has had exponential growth in requests for federal funding. So we talked about stations. So what I want to do now is just give you some real-world examples from across the United States of different elements of BRT. We'll start with stations. Station is sort of the focal point of your system, if you will, the focal point of the BRT system. It's what people notice when you're using it. It's what people notice when you're driving down the street. This is a typical prototype of a BRT station. You can see it's not a typical bus stop. It has many of the elements that you'll see in rail. It's got elevated platforms for level boarding, off-board ticket vending machine, enhanced passenger information, and customer experience. Maybe a few examples. This is the Silver Line in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This BRT opened in 2014. You'll notice the architecture of the station, the cantilever design, very similar to a light rail. This is Richmond, Virginia. Again, a very significant station structure. One of the things they did, as you can see in the maps, those are specific to each station, outlining the area that station is in. This is in Silver Line in Boston, Massachusetts. You can see how it is designed to accommodate the severe weather of the Northeast. A very significant structure, completely different than probably what you would need here, but completely designed to handle the weather. Cleveland, Ohio, Health Line. This is one of the very early big BRT projects. It opened in 2008. This was a revitalization project for downtown Cleveland. And one of the things that they did that was very unique is they sold the naming rights for this BRT to Cleveland Clinic and University Hospital. So they named it the Health Line. And with those naming rights, they used it for station maintenance and things like 3-season floral plantings. So something that you can't normally do with a lot of taxpayer dollars necessarily. They use it through the naming rights. And as you can see in that picture on the top, they're very, very attractive stations, and they change those plantings 3 times a year. And this is one that many of you are familiar with. I think some of you were just down in Miami recently. This is the South Dade Transitway. These stations are very unique, and as we talked about, BRT can be anything. These stations are actually air-conditioned to handle the South Florida heat, but as importantly, they're designed to be able to be converted to light rail when ridership in this corridor reaches a certain level. So these stations can be both BRT and light rail at a future date. One of the other elements about BRT is the guideway. How do you make the bus move fast? It's called bus rapid transit for a reason. One of the ways that you do that is by having dedicated right-of-way or dedicated guideway for buses. This is Minneapolis, the Orange Line. This was a project in conjunction with Minnesota DOT when they rebuilt I-35. You can see that this route operates in the middle of I-35, operating from Minneapolis to Bloomington in the south. The red lanes in the center are bus lanes. This is really one of the more complicated BRT projects in the country. In the north, at the top of your picture, as it exits I-35, is a dedicated flyover for bus only. And then once they're into downtown, they operate in contraflow lanes for BRT. This is the station in the middle. As it moves south towards Bloomington, it comes off the highway and serves some park and ride lots, and then gets back on I-35 and operates in managed lanes. So it's a very intricate design, very well done. This is the station on the inside, and again, you can see the station in the middle of I-35. This is Connecticut CT Fast Track in Hartford, between Hartford and Bridgeton. This operates on an abandoned railroad right-of-way that Connecticut DOT purchased the right-of-way, turned it into a bus-only way. This BRT operates the 9.4 miles in total length, but there are other buses that come in and use the busway at different points to make connections with the BRT. And of course, emergency vehicles can use it as well. The Silver Line in Houston, Texas was built with their own dedicated roadway. As you can see in here, at curb to curb. There is no sharing the lanes. There's no, cars cannot use it or cross it. I'm sorry, they can cross it at dedicated places, but the intent is that this would be converted to light rail at some time in the future, and that's why they built the BRT to have its own lane, curb to curb. Indianapolis opened in 2019. They did not have the ability to, or they didn't have the ability in their corridor to build curb lanes like we just saw in Houston, but look at the way they achieved dedicated lanes through aggressive striping and red lanes at stations. And Van Ness Boulevard in San Francisco, this is one of the most congested corridors in the entire country. They rebuilt portions of Van Ness from curb line to curb line, including utility relocations, new street lights, pedestrian access, landscaping, and then put the BRT in the center of the road. And then finally, we'll talk about vehicles for just a second. In the United States, the predominant vehicle is a New Flyer 60-foot articulated bus, and they're basically in two versions. This is a 5-door version. This is the one that they operate in Cleveland with 5 doors. They have doors on both sides of the bus, so that it operates much like a light rail vehicle, so they can stop at either curbside or median. Los Angeles has the same bus, but they only have a 3-door version, which is all the doors are on the right side. This is their newest buses, which are electric powered, and this shows the overhead catenary at the charging stations along the line. So that was just a really quick overview of some operations currently in existence, and Mila's going to talk about TOD.
Thank you, Mark. Madam Chair, members of the board, I will talk to you about TOD. So as Mark mentioned earlier, BRT is anything you want it to be. Various communities make different choices about the investment. Generally speaking, as we look at relationship between BRT and TOD, what we are seeing is higher investments in BRT infrastructure, like guideways, like stations, tend to generate more economic development opportunities. So some of the factors that are leading to TOD success are obviously some of the strong governmental support that comes through in the form of zoning that allows for higher densities, higher buildings. Also, another example is mix of finance and public-private partnerships, and again, significant investment in BRT infrastructure. BRT systems that have dedicated lanes, that have prominent stations, streetscape improvements, sidewalk improvements, upgrades to utilities, they tend to be seen as more permanent by the development community, and as a result, generate more economic development opportunities. There are some challenges when it comes to calculating economic development. For example, attribution of growth. What do you attribute the growth to? Do you attribute it to the introduction of the BRT system in the corridor? Do you attribute it to market trends, or both? So that's one of the examples. Another one is a lag time lag between the development of the BRT system and when you actually can see the development in your community. So I will share some of the well-known examples. As Mark said, there are numerous BRT systems across the country. These three are some of the well-known examples that range from 2008 construction, 2019, and we will start with Healthline. I know Mark already covered Healthline from the standpoint of stations, but this was a truly transformational project to the corridor. It is anchored on one side by downtown Cleveland, on the other side by University Circle. And for reference, University Circle is a very vibrant area. It has museums, it has culture, restaurants, attractions, and it also has one of the world-renowned hospitals, Cleveland Clinic. So those two anchors already existed. However, the corridor between them has seen disinvestment for many years. With introduction of BRT system and some of the upgrades that were done to the corridor through the delivery of that system and design, including upgrades to the streetscape, the corridor was completely revitalized. One of the reports calculated the economic benefit of $5.5 billion in new investment along the corridor. There was also a recent study that was done in 2022. It was published by the Journal of Transportation Geography. This particular study looked at property values within the vicinity of BRT projects. Specifically, they picked Healthline as one of their case studies. What they determined is the property value increased by approximately 15%. And when they isolated that to multifamily, that came to about 40%. So now I'm going to switch to a different example, and we'll look at Flatiron Flyer that serves Denver, Colorado, and surrounding areas. I'd like to start with saying that this is a very active and fast-growing area. So there are already strong market trends that exist there. However, the communities decided to channel the growth that would occur regardless along BRT stations, and the transit agency, RTD, that do track some of the economic development numbers. And for example, the 4 stations that are listed on the slide produced approximately 4,700 of new residential units. So this is what it looks like in real life once it's built. On the left, you can see a diagram of the Broomfield station. The red symbol shows where the BRT stations are located, and then you can see all of the developments that have occurred. On the right, you can see the photographs of what they actually look like. You can see apartment buildings, some retail, and hotel. Okay. So now we will switch to another example, Indigo in Indianapolis. First, I'd like to state that this particular system, they chose BRT mode as the spine of their entire transit network. So you can see that they have 3 lines. One is in operation, another one is coming online shortly, and another one is designed. And the lines go through downtown area, going north, south, east, and west. Several local development groups track the numbers along all 3. And according to their calculations and reports, they produced $1.3 billion of investment. So what does that look like, again, on the ground? These are some of the apartments that either planned or broke ground or coming online along the BRT lines. Versa and Link, these are interesting because they are infill developments. They utilize former commercial sites. One is former Kroger site, another one is former White Castle. Both of them are apartments with retail at the bottom and some amenities surrounding the area. Here's another example, again, housing developments with some retail at the bottom, and these do include some affordable and workforce housing. So with that, hopefully I gave you a glimpse of what's possible with BRT. Again, we chose several different examples that are pretty well established and well known across the country. And that concludes my presentation, and Mark and I are happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea how transit-oriented development around light rail compares to that around BRT?
Yeah, so there are a lot of studies in that regard, and I would say that the general feeling is light rail will generate more economic development than BRT. But as Mila said, the more robust the BRT, the more economic development that will generate. But as a general rule, yes, light rail will generate more economic development.
Thank you. If I could just make a comment, the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy has a rating system for BRT lines throughout the country, and there's literally only a handful that are even rated as bronze or silver. There is no gold BRT standard in North America, and you highlighted 4 of the highest rated ones in the country with your photographs: Cleveland, Hartford, LA, and Van Ness. Most of the other ones aren't nearly as nice as what was shown today. I just want to make that point. And one other point, according to CATS, the engineer that I spoke with, the BRT that is envisioned or contemplated for our area could not be readily retrofitted as light rail at a later date because it would be a totally different plan. This is according to Andy Mock. A lot of 90-degree turns, et cetera, that could not accommodate, could not be later turned into light rail. So I just wanted to make those points.
Yeah, I think that while there are some cities out there that may contemplate in the future a conversion, it would certainly, and I won't disagree with Andy, it would certainly not be our intent to design. I think there are 2 things about that. One, design changes, and the 2 aren't designed the same. The way that the alignments and other things have to be built, they're not the same. The other thing is I would be hesitant to sort of think about an investment in BRT, which is a very large investment, certainly could easily be into the billions of dollars in and of itself, as something that would be a quote-unquote temporary solution. Certainly with that kind of investment, you have a very large investment that you need to amortize and allow to the asset to amortize over its useful life. And so I'm not sure what the other cities thinking about that are. I suspect that they have very long-range plans when they start to talk about that, because BRT in and of itself is a very, very large investment in and of itself.
Yeah, and you're right. To date, there has not been any BRT that has been converted to light rail. And the majority of them do not contemplate that at design, but there are certainly some that do.
Thank you. Others? All right, I can ask a few questions while people continue to ponder. Can you talk to us about the rating system, gold, bronze, or gold, silver, and bronze? Is it the case that newer ones in the U.S. tend to be more highly rated, or is it, policy decisions of the financial resources of the planners for each community? How do you relate that to what's happening outside the U.S. where there are gold standard BRT programs? Is gold standard BRT possible in the U.S.? If so, why hasn't it happened yet? What are the barriers? Thank you.
So ITDP does rank BRT systems around the world. I think most people believe that they are skewed to international BRT. So there are, as the mayor indicated, there are no gold standard BRT systems in the U.S. Albuquerque was ranked as a gold for its design, but has not been ranked since it has been opened. So they do need to do that. I think part of where it gets skewed is in terms of ridership, because in the international corridors where BRT is located, they carry tens and hundreds of thousands of people, literally hundreds of thousands of people on BRT over the course of a day. So because they're just in such immensely dense areas in Asia and South America in particular. I'm not sure. So
So why do you think there haven't been any jurisdictions in America that are gold? And what are the barriers to becoming a gold standard?
So
I mean,
from-
like the best ones in America, do they have dedicated right of way?
Yeah.
Do they, have, if someone can bring up the slide that said the elements that strong BRT programs need to have, the different aspects and characteristics?
Yes, so in the U.S., BRT is still relatively new. I mean, compared to where BRT has evolved in international cities, and obviously compared to rail systems. So I think that's part of it. BRT has gotten, the trend is BRT is becoming a lot more sophisticated and starting to move more towards more and more dedicated lanes. Early projects were shared lanes, and quite honestly, early BRT projects were often in places that did not have rail programs, that did not have necessarily strong transit programs, that were looking for ways to enhance their service. As BRT gets more sophisticated and you look at things like CT Fast Tracks, which I gave you an example of, Los Angeles right now, Metro is working on one of their BRT lines to grade separate it or have railroad crossings or gate crossings at intersections so that the bus can have complete right-of-way, like similar to a train. As those kinds of systems come online, I think you're going to start to see opportunities for gold rating. But yes, to date, there is not one.
Yeah, it's slide 92 that I'm trying to drive towards, where it says bus rapid features. Yeah, I mean, in your opinion, what programs in the United States have enhanced stations, off-board fare collection, transit signal priority, dedicated lanes? Like, in your mind, what do you think most checks the box? Because I would like to learn more about the ones that are the farthest along in achieving a gold standard, whether or not they get the actual certification.
So I think it's some of the ones we talked about. I mean, it is CT Fast Tracks in Connecticut. It's Cleveland. The Minneapolis example is a really good one, the Orange Line. I don't think it's been open long enough to even have a rating yet. So that one may get closer. But I think some of the examples we showed today are
Okay. And
as the mayor indicated, I think those are the premier systems in the country.
Thank you. And if we can now go to the, I'm sorry. Let me just ask one more. I was asking all my questions while people thought, and I'm glad people are coming up with thoughts. But one more since I've got the floor. The slide that says capital investment grants pipeline, which one more. Yes. So one thing I'm wondering is, it seems like BRT is not something we do in America very much. And yet, when I look at the difference between 2008 and 2003, I wonder if we are not, in fact, at the top of a crest for BRT, and we can't really see it because we're in the middle of it, because you're telling me there's a 65% increase in the number of BRT projects being approved by the FTA and getting federal match. So, I mean, can you comment on that?
So BRT is experiencing a huge growth. And these numbers, they show it. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, BRT was really the domain of mid-sized transit agencies or mid-sized cities that didn't have rail, couldn't afford rail, were never intending to have rail, and used BRT as a way to make a significant transit investment and get quick returns on it. But what's happened is BRT now is spreading to cities all over the country, and even some of the largest cities that have sophisticated, well-established transit systems, including rail, are moving to BRT as a supplement or an addition to their transit network. So again, we showed some examples, Minneapolis, but San Francisco, one of the great rail systems in the country, is moving to BRT. Los Angeles is moving to BRT. Houston, Dallas. So it's not just mid-sized cities anymore. It's cities all over the country that are doing it.
Mr. Lathrop.
Yeah, I had a question about the features slide. I think it's one away from this one. Somebody scroll to that one. There you go. The question about dedicated lanes, and obviously, I don't know about BRT very much, but I know about, by analogy, dedicated bike lanes or protected bike lanes, or bike lanes that are not protected. And the ones that aren't protected, there's, with some frequency, there are trucks or cars that park in those or drive in those because they can, because they're unprotected. So in a BRT where you have a lane that is not protected, it's just striped, I want to know if there's data on how that works out. Like, in other words, is it slowed or obstructed by vehicles that go in there because they can? Similar to the goal line.
I don't know that there's data on that. I could certainly check TRB or something like that.
What about just your opinion?
So anecdotally, yeah, I mean, that is an issue. That's why you see places such as Houston, the one I showed you, that had the 6-inch curbs on each side to keep cars from doing that. But that is certainly an issue. The Indianapolis example is painted lines. It does not prevent a car from coming into it. Part of that is, part of how you get over that is how well your local police agency patrols that or works with the agency on it. But it's, it's very similar to streetcar. If a truck stops on a streetcar track, the one advantage the BRT has, obviously, is it can move around an obstruction. So somebody stopped there, or there's a fire truck there, they can divert and go around it and get back into the dedicated lane. But as we talk about the evolution of BRT, that is what we're seeing more of, is a higher degree of dedicated lane and not just simply striping and red lanes painted.
Mr. Parker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to oversell myself here, but I do have experience. I've ridden the Health Line in Cleveland. I have at least some, or had some affiliation with a transit advocacy group up in Richmond when they were building the Pulse there. What my fear is that people will sell the public on beautiful pictures of the Health Line or the Pulse, and what they end up getting is essentially the Sprinter. So in the parts of the Health Line where it's dedicated, it does very much run just like light rail on rubber tires. The stations are nice, dedicated lanes. There's a lot of people who ride it, but I believe about a third of it is in mixed traffic, if I'm not mistaken, on the east end. And it's been about 8 years since I rode it, but I believe that's still the case. The Pulse, when I lived in Richmond, the Pulse runs in dedicated lanes along Broad Street. Again, very nice stations. But once you get west of Interstate 195, it goes into mixed traffic use. Same with the east end of that line, so only about half of it is in dedicated lanes. So it's really a mixed bag with what you get. It does offer some flexibility and potential cost savings, but sometimes people get the impression that it's just like the Health Line everywhere, or just like the parts of the Health Line that are in downtown everywhere. In actuality, it's mixed running here and dedicated lanes over here, and it's cheaper, I think, because a lot of it is running in mixed traffic and is sold as BRT, and that's what he said at the beginning, sir, if I may use your quote, it can be anything you want it to be. I think that's the most problematic feature of BRT, is because of something called BRT creep, where people call something BRT that's not really BRT. So if you can guarantee that everything is going to be like the 2/3 of the health line that is in mixed, dedicated lanes, then yeah, it's solid. But if not, then you're selling the public a bill of goods.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Really important. Mr. Thunberg and then Mr. Herms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think both of the presenter and Mr. Parker are touching on one of the key elements, I think, that you need to consider, and it's the goal. What is your goal in providing that BRT service? And let's just talk about Cleveland just for an example. You know, part of the goal was to revitalize an area that was in decline. In the downtown area of Cleveland, there were a lot of empty buildings and things of that nature, and they wanted to use it as a branding opportunity to utilize the fact that it's a health center, so that you can have a lot of different goals for a transit system like that. So you need to have clearly defined goals. And if Mr. Parker is indeed right in his assessment that that having a part of the system that's in mixed traffic diminishes it, or it takes you away from your goal, then you need to figure out exactly what it is that you want and how you're going to get there. The second thing is that in Europe, and those of the people around that table and your consultants there know that you've got folks that are naturally inclined to use transit in Europe. So it's never going to be a fair comparison when you're moving, when you're competing with a population that's naturally inclined to get in their automobile. So the question for the consultant is that, let's just say the goals for the Cleveland project were to, get people out of their cars to reduce traffic in the downtown and create more vitality. The question is did you actually get more people out of their cars, and did you increase transit ridership in the city as a result of that? And did you achieve your branding goal for the economic development associated with being a health center? Third, the vehicle makes a difference. So, when you talk about the types of vehicles that operate, and like that new flyer vehicle that operates in the BRT, you're going to be looking at markedly different vehicles. You're going to be looking at different maintenance and replacement cycles, and you're going to be looking, operationally for something that has a much different profile than light rail, and is not really quite as expensive to manage there. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill or Mila, would you like to respond? There were a couple questions in there.
And I'll address Mr. Parker's comment too. One thing that I get asked a lot is, what do you say about BRT? And I always do say you can't oversell it. You got to make sure that what you're saying, you got to manage people's expectations of what BRT is. It is not the perfect transit solution in all corridors, and it's not even the right transit solution in all corridors. And I'm not here to say that, but it can offer a very significant transit improvement in specific corridors at a fraction of the cost of rail, in a much shorter time period that you can build it than rail. And in many instances, and I I'm not speaking any specific corridor, there's a lot of corridors that will not qualify for federal funds for rail because of the cost or ridership, but you can get federal funds for BRT. So it clearly works better when it's dedicated, and you're going to get quicker ridership. And there are places that you can get 70, 80, 90% of dedicated lanes for BRT. Federal FTA requires 50%. So you only have to have 50% if you're going after New Start's funding. So you just have to be realistic what you want BRT to accomplish. It is a transit improvement. It will generate new ridership, as Mr. Thunberg discussed. And I didn't bring ridership statistics with me, but virtually every BRT system in the country has experienced ridership increases versus the transit that was in that corridor prior to BRT. And it can bring some level of economic development depending on, again, what your system is and what the support for the community around it is. So, but you just have to be realistic what you're wanting to accomplish with BRT.
If I may, I'd like to add to what Mark just shared, just a real-life example. When I was assistant with Wake BRT delivery in Raleigh, before we started the design, we defined that vision. Obviously, we all knew the requirements of the FTA and what they looked for, but there was also a local standard defining what is the percentage of dedicated lanes do you want to see, and what do the stations look like. So all that took place before the system was designed, and that was tied to the local funding. Initially, it was defined at 50% to match what the FTA is requiring. Later, that goal was bumped to 70% because the community felt that wanted to be more ambitious in delivering the true BRT system. But that decision lies with the project owner, with local community, what you want to see and what you want the outcome to be. FTA is not going to drive that conversation. You will.
Thank you. I think Mayor Higdon was next. Okay, Mr. Parker, I think you are done. Dennis?
Actually, I think
I'm sorry.
Mr.
I'm so
Herms had
sorry.
one,
I'm so
too.
sorry, Jarrett. You're next. Please go ahead.
First, I have more of a comment and eventually a question. But so one of the things I think is going to be important is that too much of Mr. Parker and also some of Mr. Thunberg's comments is the big thing is you need to make sure that it has its own dedicated lane that is able to at least like 80 to 85% not in mixed traffic. I understand there might be a situation where there might be a small percentage that might be mixed, in traffic. I have some realities or realities, but it definitely needs to be most of it, like 80, 85% of it is within its own dedicated lane. So I think there definitely needs to be a kind of study looking at the affected corridors and be able to see where that could be possible. It involves some degree of maybe eminent domains, majestic, whatever affected roadways. Because I speak this coming from, this is not BRT, but this is more of what works from an express perspective. When you think about like the 53X or some of the North Mac express buses presently, what does get people out of their cars in that situation, to Mayor Thunberg's point, we are in a society where a lot of people now draw to just getting into their car and getting somewhere. But again, this is not BRT. I will not call it BRT, but I'm saying, but as far as from a lesser perspective, what does work is the fact that it does utilize something such as the I-77 Express lanes, which is not its own lane, its own specifically for the bus, but it is something that is more reliable than I-77 general purpose lanes, to which it would give you a better arrival time and not have to sit through traffic, or you have to pay through gas and tolls and things like that. So I think some degree of a study of that will be needed. So I wanted to just put it on record that I share a TSAC making that comment. So my other question that's definitely the big thing that definitely needs to be answered by someone who can be able to make that study. One question I do have, kind of thinking about from a funding perspective. So you had mentioned selling naming rights. Now, presently, for family and other work-related reasons, I'm actually currently in Philly, which is why I'm tuning in remote, where there are some degree of naming rights that have been dealt with when it comes to a lot of our their stepped-up facilities, their transit system. And recently, there is a Drexel station at 30th Street, and it is beautiful. It has a lot of amenities. I think it's definitely a very worth itself kind of station. So one question I did have is, what is typically the process for because I know this would be new for CATS, what would be the process for a system like CATS being able to secure some degree of naming rights so it won't just be a stop, stick in the ground, or just a glorified shelter, that it is something that would mirror or even rival that of light rail stations? I know I was kind of long.
No, that's okay. You're breaking up a little bit, but if Mila or Mark can give us any insights into what the arrangement was with naming rights in other communities to get a sense of the scope.
So CATS does have a naming rights agreement. We have not, so we do have a company on contract. We have been exploring naming rights. At this point, we have not moved forward with it yet. As we started to wait and see what the transit system plan would look like. One of the things that has been completed is our consultants have gone through the entire system as it sits today to identify assets that they think could be interesting or generate interest from a naming rights standpoint. Clearly, packaging is important. But they have done the assessment on ours, and they would wait to look to what the future would hold for additional projects. And so beyond what other communities have done with naming rights, we are exploring that today. We just haven't moved forward yet on the eve of some of the major projects having better definition.
Okay. So we do have other informational items. So if the group is comfortable, why don't we pause here, because we have other important informational updates, but I really do appreciate you kind of giving us a baseline, and I think one of the most important takeaways is it's probably wiser to say the elements, the characteristics that we hope to deliver and not use the name, because the name is so ambiguous as to be misleading. So that's, anyway, a takeaway from me. If everybody's all right, we will move on to the next informational item, which is the transit system plan update process. Ms. Goforth.
Okay, thank you. So good evening again. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an overview tonight of our proposed process to update the transit system plan. First, I'd like to set the stage with what we're trying to accomplish with this process. With the recent success in securing the Red Line right-of-way and gaining support for the potential sales tax referendum, we have reached an important milestone where we have the opportunity to bring our transit vision to reality. Through this process, we want to create an integrated bus and rapid transit plan that balances the needs across our community. We want to use a transparent and open process that builds trust, with the goal of developing a realistic and implementable transit system plan.
Bless you. Thank you.
The starting point for the transit system plan update will be the MTC's adopted plans, the Envision My Ride, Better Bus Plan, and the 2030 Corridor System Plan. Through the update process, we will develop an integrated plan that outlines the goals and priorities for the transit program for the next 30 years. So, what is the Transit System Plan update? This will be a comprehensive approach that combines many aspects of our transit vision. The Better Bus Plan will be the foundation of the Transit System Plan. Bus service will continue to be the backbone of how CATS will meet the essential mobility needs of our community. We will also update the Rapid Transit Corridor System Plan to create a balanced program of bus and rail improvements. We've done a lot of work over the years to define the vision for transit in the future. What's new with this update that we haven't had since the MTC approved the funding for the Blue Line Extension project back in 2010 is a fiscally constrained transit system plan. We've known for some time that our existing funding sources are fully committed to our existing transit services. We also know that the proposed sales tax cannot fund the entire transit system plan as currently adopted. So this process will evaluate the proposed bus and rail improvements to develop a program that is fiscally constrained and can be funded with committed, planned, and future funding. It will include an implementation schedule to deliver those improvements. To support this process, our CATS leadership team, including myself, Jason Lawrence, and Chad Howell, will be supported by a team of transit and financial consultants, including Foursquare, Kittleson Associates, WSP, and InfraStrategies. Importantly, the transit system plan will build on the CATS mission and vision of moving people forward and creating a seamless transit experience that improves the lives of individuals, fuels economic growth, builds a connected region, and fosters a sustainable future for all. So, what are the steps in the process to update the plan? We've developed a 3-phase approach. Again, we want to have a transparent and inclusive process. So first, we will begin with confirming the goals and objectives of the transit system plan, as well as baseline assumptions. Second, we will develop and evaluate different scenarios to meet the goals and objectives. And third, we will seek to develop consensus around recommendations for an updated transit system plan. This graphic provides an overview of the proposed schedule. This fall, we will undertake a lot of the technical work to update base assumptions, as well as begin our public engagement on goals and objectives. Then in winter and spring of 2025, we will develop and evaluate alternative scenarios, including financial analysis. Our target for recommendations and MTC adoption of the transit system plan is late spring 2025. Each phase of the process will include a robust public engagement effort, which I'll discuss in more detail later in the presentation. This slide provides more detail about the work that is underway now. This first phase is focused on building the foundations of the analysis. First, confirming the goals and objectives, which will include understanding regional transit needs, travel patterns and demographics, as well as defining the evaluation criteria that we will use to measure alternative scenarios against our goals and objectives. Second, updating baseline assumptions. With the Better Bus Plan as the foundation of the plan, the team will incorporate the results of the Better Bus planning efforts that have been ongoing, including the short and long-term bus service plan, incorporating operational efficiencies, updating assumptions about fleet needs, as well as microtransit, mobility hubs, and bus stop improvements. At the same time, we are working on preliminary cost estimate updates for the rapid transit projects. Another critical aspect of the first phase of work is confirming the baseline financial assumptions to ensure accurate, conservative, and transparent assumptions that build trust and confidence in the results. This includes updating current expenses and revenues, operating cost projections, revenue projections, cost escalation assumptions, as well as debt and financing costs. Finally, we'll incorporate all the updates from the Better Best program and the rapid transit projects, along with some baseline phasing assumptions to provide an initial baseline program as the starting point for looking at financial capacity and constraints. The next phase of the transit system plan update would be an iterative process to create alternative program scenarios that are fiscally constrained and would be evaluated based on our goals and objectives. For the Better Bus program, this would primarily look at the timing of service and infrastructure improvements. For the rapid transit corridors, the alternatives could include value engineering, changing the terminus, mode, or alignment, as well as phasing of projects. Community input would also be an important part of this step. The results of this process would be recommendations for a program of improvements with an implementation schedule and financial plan. This would also be incorporated into the MPO's Metropolitan Transportation Plan. As I mentioned, community engagement and public input will be a critical part of the process as we work to develop a plan that is driven by the needs and goals of our community. This will include public meetings, both virtual and in-person, in locations throughout Mecklenburg County. We'll also take advantage of ongoing engagement opportunities, such as community area planning, our project meetings, as well as other city, town, and county meetings. We'll also engage with key stakeholders, including community and business organizations and neighborhood associations. And we'll meet with staff and elected officials regularly throughout the process. And finally, we'll use our website and other online tools to share information and gather public input. The next couple of slides outline in more detail the planned activities for the update process. This fall, a number of formal public engagement activities are underway and planned, including the first round of public meetings on the plan update, which would be focused on goals and objectives. The MTC would specifically be engaged on formulating the goals and objectives, as well as reviewing the baseline assumptions. Next year, we would have both formal and informal public engagement around alternatives, particularly focused in areas where there may be proposed changes to the plan. We are also planning to engage the MTC throughout this process in both workshops and through updates as part of your regular meetings. Sorry. So what are our next steps? We are planning to include several topics related to the transit system plan update as part of the MTC strategy session in October. This would include input on goals and objectives, understanding the regional transit needs, an update on the Better Bus plan, reviewing the financial model assumptions and inputs, as well as an initial baseline financial analysis. We will also, at the meeting, kick off the budget process with a review of the FY24 and 25 budget, and also have updates on other CATS projects and initiatives. And so I'm just going to end here on this slide with the overview of the process, and I welcome any input or comments, questions from the MTC. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goforth. Questions in the room?
I don't have a question, but I think that we've covered a lot of the things that we've discussed with everybody's input. So I know that this is going to be something that we'll start with, and we'll adjust as it goes along, and we're doing things. Will we be hiring, who will be the follow-up as we're talking about this? I mean, I know that you guys are busy all the time, so I guess the question is there going to be an outside consultant to do this, or to lead the process, or tell me how the implementation would work and who would do it?
Yes, absolutely. So we will obviously have our CAT staff involved from all sides on the best planning as well as our project teams. But we will be supported by consultants as well. We already have consultants on board for the Better Best program. That's Kittleson and Associates in Foursquare. And on the quarter system plan, we're planning to utilize WSP. We have an on-call services contract with them, and they're also the consultant for the Silverline project. So we think they'll be an important resource for us. And we also will utilize InfraStrategies for the financial modeling work.
I would like to think about someone that could lead some of the public work, that we'll be going in and asking people how they do this. And I know that there's some opportunities because the communities, our populations are different, and we're going to need to have different people in terms of this. So I hope that we'll be very conscious as we're deciding on the community input with people that really connect, because we are going to have different communities and different, like bus drivers, rail riders, and all of these other things that, and the city and county continues to grow, there's a lot more territory to cover. And so I hope that we'll be thinking about those kinds of consultants as well.
Absolutely. I didn't mention that these teams have sub-consultants on them as well, and one of them is for public involvement, Civility Localized, and they're a small firm that has a lot of experience working across our community. But as certainly as we need to add additional resources to help us with this engagement effort, we're going to do that, absolutely.
And we will have minority participation throughout the process, if that's a question.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
One other thing to also answer your question, Mayor Lyles. As we think about the transit plan, Better Bus, and the transit system plan, we will also be working with the towns as well as Charlotte to think about how the transit system plan and Better Bus, those improvements, also may come together in a synergistic way, if you will, with the transportation side of investment. So using Charlotte as an example, we know that there are planned road improvements associated with the potential for new funding, and those road improvements and transit improvements in many cases can work together, and we want to make sure that the community is aware of those and that we're working with all of the towns and all of the stakeholders to understand where those connections are.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else like to be heard on this? Okay, that's very robust. I look forward and thank you. And our final informational item is the Transit System Plan Financial Model, presentation by Interim CEO Brent Cagle.
Through the chair, can I ask a question? I had an ask that I wanted a vote of the MTC, so I don't believe this is an informational item. This is something that I wanted to ask the MTC to vote on something.
So this was the item that I placed on the agenda that I believed was responsive to your request.
Here's the email that I sent the chair. I said I would like to add an agenda item to our next MTC meeting for September 25th. I would like to have a discussion concerning using InfraStrategies to conduct alternate financial modeling for the transit tax. And so if I could just go on before we get started. The town of Matthews contacted InfraStrategies, and let me say that the town of Matthews is bending over backwards trying to find a way to support public transit in this whole effort. We don't want to be the people that are outliers. We contacted InfraStrategies, which is one of the consulting firms hired by CATS to provide financial modeling and strategies for the transit plan, and asked if they could run some additional models for us. And InfraStrategies informed us that since they were under contract by CATS, it would be best to get the MTC to okay and authorize this work for us. The modeling is necessary to provide informed conversation at the Transit Summit that the town of Matthews has scheduled for Saturday, October 19th at the Valerie C. Woodard Center from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. The Transit Summit is not duplicative of the MTC workshop scheduled for October 23rd in a few notable ways. First, invitations to the Transit Summit went out to all Mecklenburg County elected leaders, not just those that sit on the MTC. This is to get a broad cross-section of elected leaders in one place to discuss the transit plan. Secondly, other potential funding models will be considered. While to my knowledge, the MTC is only considering a 40-40-20 model for roads, trains, and buses, and that may or may not be correct. You can talk about that. But to be clear, nothing that will be discussed at the Transit Summit on October 19th would in any way violate three key tenets. Number one, roads first. Number two, the red line will be the top priority and the first built rail project. Number three, the sales tax is capped at 1 cent. So I wanted to ask the MTC to permit the town of Matthews to use InfraStrategies, because not doing so would be a disservice to your colleagues who have agreed to participate in the Transit Summit. And without proper modeling, we will be unable to definitively tell if other approaches are even feasible, and knowing that information would be good for all of us. So that was my request.
Thank you, Mayor Higdon. Mr. Hagel, do you want to give some context, and then we can have a group discussion and see what we need to do?
Yeah, so I apologize if I did not understand the request. I believe the request was for the discussion, and so I placed it on the agenda as such. And I don't think, I would leave it to the MTC to determine if the item is sufficient to have that discussion. I believed it was, or that was certainly my intent by placing it on the agenda. I know that there have been several questions, so stepping back a little bit and talking about the model, but before that, talking about alternate scenarios. I know that Mayor Higdon, you had asked for an alternate scenario, 45-45-10. Quite frankly, that scenario, I think, can be run. I think that it will be insufficient for bus. Bus is very important. It is the foundation of the transit system. And I think that even beyond 10% or 20%, I do have concerns that at some point, I think we need to clarify what I believe the legislation says, and I believe that it says 40% is dedicated to roads, transportation. No more than 40% can be allocated to rail. And then using that as the allocation cap, it backs into 20%. But it does not say that bus must be no more than 20%. And at this point, talking about the revenue allocation, I'm not sure. We need to be able to bring to the MTC in October more definitive numbers and rough estimates on bus. I am not entirely certain that 20% is the limitation of better bus. It may be more than 20%. And we need to know that, because we'll need to make, through the MTC and public process, we'll need to make decisions about bus and how that plays into rail allocations. But as I understand the legislation, it isn't saying that 40% is for rail. It's saying rail can be no more than 40%, but certainly it could be less, and that would be the case if bus was more than 20%. But we don't have the cost estimates on bus at this point today. So that would concern me about an alternate model with 45-45-10, because it still doesn't get to what the true cost of bus is. I think the second question was how much rail along the Silver Line could be achieved and be fiscally constrained. And I think that is an excellent question. And my answer to that is that is a more complicated question to answer. What we need to do is first look at the model and take that model and make sure all of the financial assumptions are conservative, reasonable, correct, to the best of our ability. And then we have to start looking at the silver line and determining how much could be built for a minimum operating segment, that's federal speak, because if you don't obtain a minimum operating segment, you're not eligible for federal funds, right? And so it's more than just how many miles can be built with X amount of dollars. It's can you achieve a minimum operating segment and still have and achieve fiscal constraint or fiscal capacity. And that is a more detailed analysis that is more than just a financial analysis. It's also an analysis of the existing silver line in its totality. And that is the work, as Ms. Goforth talked about, that the team will be able to do. Now, the good news is the silver line is we do have a lot of information, engineering and design information on the silver line, and we believe we'll be able to answer that question, but I do not believe we'll be able to answer that question even by the October MTC meeting, because we will need to work through that a little bit more in detail.
Well, respectfully, we don't have any legislation yet. We have draft legislation, and Raleigh has not mandated 40-40-20. And if there were other options that could better serve the entire community, I think we should at least consider them. We're going to be totally transparent. I mean, but we don't have legislation yet. We haven't even supposedly presented it, and I've heard from several people that Raleigh has not mandated 40-40-20. That's what the managers came up with as a suggestion, but it has not been mandated. What was mandated by Raleigh was roads first. And to be totally transparent, Matthews has no interest whatsoever in BRT. We don't want BRT. We want the promise of light rail at some point in the next 50 years or whatever, but we don't want BRT. We don't think, because I don't think it can be built to a gold standard, and we will have buses that don't have dedicated lines, and they'll be sitting in traffic, and it's really not a whole lot better than what we have now. We want light rail, or the promise of light rail at some point, and I believe a lot of people in Charlotte want that as well. I don't want to speak for Mayor Lyles, but I've heard from lots of people in East Charlotte, and that's their desire as well. So my ask is, can we not even run a couple other models and just see what happens? And that may not even be feasible, but why not?
So we would ask that we hold the MTC extended meeting in October that will give us the ability to continue refining the model and to bring to you key assumptions, and then to start to do the work to look at what is possible with the transit system plan, not with no base assumptions here. So the decision on BRT for any of the lines, the Silver Line or any of the lines, that is not made. That is part of the process. And we're working through that, and we would ask for the ability to continue working through the model and evaluating the Silver Line and all of the projects to bring to you proposals and recommendations, or proposals at this point, to engage the public, and then ultimately bring to the MTC what we believe is what will be a fiscally constrained transit system plan that meets the needs of the community.
Let me ask a clarifying question. If I understand correctly, I mean, my hope would be that every member of the MTC, every town and elected official, can bring forth hypothetical scenarios that you would like to have run through the expert and the model, the complex model, and that we'll have a public discussion about that. It just is a question of, like, is the model ready yet? And it sounds to me like it isn't, but
The models were run in a couple days.
You know,
Previously, we did lots of models, the managers did models, and they got results in 48 hours. So I think the models could be done quickly. Everything's already built.
Sorry, I was talking.
Apologies.
Yeah. So certainly staff can speak to this, but, what I understand is that it's complex and that it requires context because, for example, last mile is not the same thing as a middle mile. And so, for us to have a transparent process where we can, review the models the scenarios that are submitted, and we can hear the results together in public with transparency that the whole public can hear. We can have staff give an opportunity to give context for each of those scenarios. Like, that's a process that can happen, is my understanding and speaking to staff. So, I think that Mayor Higdon's request is reasonable. I just think that it has to happen in a process. It shouldn't happen behind closed doors. And so let's do that as soon as we can. That's my input on this.
Well, this is,
Well, I'd like to know if I've stated this correctly or not in terms of what can be done.
So let me try to clarify what I was trying to say. If the question is, what is the result of changing a draft or proposed funding split from 40-40-20 to 45-45-10, we don't need infrastrategies to do that. You take the projected revenues and you take 5% from bus and put it in transportation, and you take 5%, another 5% from bus and put it towards rail as a cap. I mean, so I agree that is not a modeling scenario that would take any time. If the question beyond that is how much Silver Line is rail can be built at 40-40-20 or 45-45-10 or any other variation of split on that, that is a more complicated question. And the model that is not a modeling question purely, it is also an engineering question, and we need more time. I don't believe we'll be able to answer that question even at the October MTC meeting, but we will be working to do that, because beyond how much does each mile of the Silver Line cost, we also have to factor in what those miles are and do they constitute a minimum operating segment. And that's not a financial question, that's a system question associated with the proposed Silver Line. Now, because the Silver Line Southeast is at approximately, not quite, but I think approximately 30% design, and the western segment is at approximately 15, we do have pretty good engineering numbers, and we have started to think about that. And so I think that we can answer that question, but I don't believe we can answer that question by October 23rd, the next MTC meeting. But we will certainly be trying to do that. But that is more than a financial modeling question.
Well,
Okay.
let's give an opportunity to other people, and I'm happy to come back to you.
Okay, sure.
Would anyone else like to be heard in the room?
Yeah.
Yes, Mayor Knox.
Just point of clarity, and then I want to circle back to something that John asked for. I think it's important to know and acknowledge that 7 of the elected boards in the county have voted to take this legislative dialogue that has been worked on by our managers and drafted to send to the legislature. 7 of the 8 elected boards have voted in favor of moving this on to the legislature. That being said, I think one of the questions you asked, John, was what kind of, since there's InfoStrategies is employed by the city of Charlotte, is there a conflict with them being able to run some scenarios to you, and at what cost would that potentially be? Is that something that your question ends up, are you saying since they're employed by this board, should you be able to utilize that, or is it something that financially is something that Matthews would say we would like to pay additional, or I'm just asking.
It's my understanding that this is a very high dollar contract, that they're under contract with the town of Charlotte or Katz, and Mr. Cagle can reply to that. So I don't think there would be any additional cost, but if there is, the town of Matthews would pay for it.
Okay. That hadn't been answered, and I wanted that answered for you.
I think there are a couple of things that we have really struggled with for a long time. But I think one of those, for me, is that when we started talking about what we're doing and doing the ILL and all the, whatever the other acronyms are, is that we would do this with the ability for the majority of us representing the people that we have, so that we would have it would not ever be, we wouldn't surprise each other. And maybe I'm a little bit surprised by this. I'm not very aware of what we're trying to accomplish, and so I am concerned as we're going through this process that we have, real clarity for our communities, the people.
Absolutely.
And I think that it's tough when we have differences of time and when we're trying to do things, when I would like our public processes for transparency reasons, as well as a lot of others, to be pretty consistent. And I think that means that we can't surprise each other on these things. So just a thought.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
I was certainly surprised when I found out Matthews wasn't going to get a Silver Line rail in May. That was a big surprise to me.
Well, I
that
wouldn't
was,
disagree with that, John.
And we talk about transparency. This is a public meeting that's being live streamed. I don't think we're doing anything under the cover of night here. I mean, it's
Well, no,
pretty
I didn't
transparent.
say that. I meant we want an informed community, and I want every part, at least for the residents that we have, to be, I think, very informed. And it's not just this meeting. I don't know, sometimes we have 30 people, sometimes we don't. But how do we do this in a way that's consistent and have a good plan for communication? It's a question for me.
Is there anyone else who wants to be heard? Okay. Mr. Roberts.
Yes, just wanted to say there were tons of models run. I don't know exactly how many, but we ran models that, stopped the Silver Line in Matthews, didn't take it all the way to CPCC. So there were lots of different models run. I imagine some of the models that maybe Mayor Higgins is talking about has already been run. So you may be able to pour from those. I would have to ask maybe Manager Jones or something that may have those models. But as I think Brent said, if we go back and try to, say, stop it at some street in Charlotte, we didn't run any models like that because it's a lot more complicated, as he said, than just, it takes engineering, I guess is what I'm saying. But there were a lot of models run all sorts of ways that everybody asked for. So I would probably go back and look at those first before I run any more models. And I'll stop there.
Would you like to respond?
So I will assume that that is 100% accurate. I was not part of those modeling exercises. What I would say is the InfraStrategies model today has really proven out something that I think we all know to be true, is the current transit system plan is not feasible with the current funding, proposed funding. The assumption that the Silver Line must be BRT or couldn't be light rail but have a different terminus, as Ms. Goforth said, VE is sort of engineer speak for cost savings, that those kinds of options aren't available, that we couldn't provide a Silver Line with a minimum operating segment that would meet FTA requirements. We don't, those are those are very good questions that are yet to be answered, and that is what we are working on trying to do. Now, as we start to answer those, I think there are a couple outcomes that could become apparent. One, there may not be a possibility of shortening the line or changing the terminus or those kinds of things and finding financial feasibility and still having a minimum operating segment. There may not be. Or alternately, there may be, but the community might, input may be that that is not the project that we talked about. I don't know how all of that goes other than to say that is the point of trying to set up the model, have these conversations with the MTC, and then have these conversations with the public to gather input and come back to the MTC with a fiscally constrained transit system plan that meets expectations and again, is fiscally constrained, because that is the flaw of the 2030 plan. It is not and never has been fiscally constrained. And now we must do the hard work of creating a plan that meets the transit needs, bus and rail, and is fiscally constrained.
All right, well, what I would like to see is, as soon as is practicable, for the members of the MTC to be able to submit scenarios that they would like to see run, and to have those results provided in public in this meeting where the public can hear, where we can ask questions and staff can have the opportunity to provide context for each of these complex questions. So I understand that it's not ready, and I am asking and charging you that as soon as is practicable, because there's obviously intense interest in this, that we have that engagement. But it sounds to me as if we cannot do it presently. So with that,
I'd like
unless,
another
yes, sir.
comment.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
Another thing, talking about surprises, I was surprised to hear Mr. Cagle say that maybe 20% isn't adequate for buses. I didn't realize this was going to be a tax for, even additional buses that would extend beyond 20%. And the reason I thought we could do 45, 45, 10 is if we're not building BRT, there should be some cost savings, I would hope. And wasn't BRT coming out of the 20%?
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
if BRT were to be built, I suppose by virtue of it not being rail, it would be a bus, or it would fall into that bucket. It is a rapid transit solution, like rail, but it is not rail, so I suppose it would be. But again, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, I think the assumption has been 40% is for rail and 20% is for bus, but the way the draft legislation is written is it says no more than 40% is for rail. It does not say that only 20% is for bus. And at this point, we need to present to you what better bus costs. It may be 18%, it might be 28%. We need to present that to you, because at this point, these are numbers based on revenue streams, not numbers based on cost of service. And bus at 10%, I suspect, is too low. I don't know if 20% is too low, just right, but we need to know that, and I think the MTC needs to know that, as well as the community, as we're making decisions on the full plan. But I do want to repeat, bus is the foundation. Every transit system is built on bus, and rapid transit is part of a system, but you cannot have a system with just rapid transit and no bus. It just doesn't work that way. And right now, our bus, we've heard over and over from the community, from folks who come to these meetings, from folks who call us, our customer service line, there is a desire to have bus enhancements. And with Article 43 revenues, the current revenue streams, there is not the ability to enhance bus service at this point. Now, I also, when I say bus, I guess I should clarify, I also mean non-rail. So I believe microtransit falls into that category. I think that if there were conversations about expanding paratransit or STS, it falls into that category. There are many things that fall into that quote-unquote bus category, and I think we need to be clear about what those true costs are before we make assumptions about 20% of the revenue is adequate. I just can't answer that today.
And I appreciate some of these comments too. Let's just remember that, bus is 60% of our entire ridership. It is the backbone of our system. It is the backbone of, I think, most urban transit systems. And we at the County Commission, and I'm sure all of you, are very much focused on equity. And there are hundreds of thousands of residents that are never going to be within proximity to the Silver Line, because we're a very big county. And this is me speaking for myself, but as a policy, I'm uncomfortable with conversations that seem like they're veering towards disinvestment in bus, whether it's bus or BRT, whichever. We have hundreds of thousands of residents across the county that rely upon the most important method of transit of all, which is bus. So I am going to pause this conversation now because, we have hashed it out.
I do have a clarifying question. So what you're saying is if the town of Matthews wishes to run some of these different scenarios, I have to do it through the MTC, and it could take a month or more to get the response back?
When the model is ready, I believe all of the members should feel free to send scenarios they want to run to Mr. Cagle, and we will have those results presented in public for the public to listen and hear with rigorous questions and staff able to provide context. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
InfraStrategies does not currently have the model. They don't have a model for this.
InfraStrategies currently has a model, and they will continue to develop the model with us. There is a second financial consulting firm, Davenport. And so as we work with InfraStrategies and Davenport, InfraStrategies model is not what I would call a financial model. It's not a pro forma. And Davenport's model is. Those two models have to be integrated because as we go through this, we need to do things like update project costs, right? Red line. It will definitely be one that we need to update and have better project costs. We also have to do things like assumptions for credit rating and cash requirements needed as in this scenario, since it assumes we're doing these projects. As a new transit authority, what will be the credit rating of a new transit authority? And what will that mean for our cost of capital? Because when we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar project over a 30-year span, those assumptions become very, very important, and they start to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in variance if they're not very well thought out. And so I'm not saying that there isn't a model. There are two models. And as we integrate those and lock in on all of those assumptions, those models will become much better tools for us to bring forward information to the MTC and the public by which we can go through this process of creating a fiscally constrained transit system plan.
Thank you. All right. At this time, I will now call on Jared Herms to give the report from TSAC.
Hello. So I'll make this relatively brief. I know we've been speaking for a while. So first we had a report on micro transit. We had discussed essentially some of the implementation strategies. So
Jared, could you just talk a little bit more slowly because the transmission's not so good, and I know we all want to be sure we can understand the report. So just a little bit more slowly because it's not a great link.
Sorry about that. So we first had our report on microtransit. It included how there has been the identification of a servicing company who will provide the microtransit service and the implementation strategy that will begin kind of calendar year 2025, during which it will be premiered in the North Mecklenburg communities that will run along the corridors of the village riders and the shuttles that are currently existing within our 3 North Mecklenburg towns, and as they collect data or so in preparation for the sunsetting of those route implementation of our microtransit. And of course, this will allow for members of PTAC to essentially provide kind of input and feedback on those services. Then there was the report by Mr. Cagle as far as missed trips, which has reduced down to under 1%, which has been good. And of course, you want to make sure the on-time percentage is.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we're still really having trouble understanding you. Could we ask you to send your comments by email, and we'll be sure to circulate it to all the MTC members? Would that be okay?
I can do that.
Okay,
I can
thank
do
you
that.
so
Thank you.
much. I apologize. Thank you again for your understanding. Mr. Parker, would you like to give your report from CTAG?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so our meeting this month occurred last week. We had 2 agenda items. One was the CEO's report, and another one was budget update from Mr. Howell. Budget update was relatively brief but informative. Then we went into the CEO's report, and that generated some discussion around the red line, around the interlocal agreement. And that's when the PTAC issue was brought up. And of course, I didn't say anything there because I wanted some time to digest it and just think about it. But those were the things we discussed. We also discussed the missed trips or the improvement in missed trips that Mr. Herms was discussing. And I did have some more comments about the BRT. I will try to run through these as fast as I can. I know we tabled part of this discussion, but I did want to bring this up. BRT is a prime example of how trade-offs work in the transit world, because you can make it anything you want to be, and because you can make it anything you want to be, it can turn into a lot of different things, whereas light rail typically has set design standards, and light rail systems look fairly similar across the board no matter where you go. So some of the benefits, they do increase ridership. I believe the ridership of the Pulse in Richmond, of the corridors that it took the place of once it was up and running, I believe the ridership in that corridor roughly doubled over what was previously there. If I'm not mistaken, I may have the statistics wrong. It does have greater TOD than normal bus. It is typically cheaper than light rail. And it does provide the opportunity for additional corridors, I think, in this area, perhaps a branch line if we were to go with BRT down to the east, perhaps a branch line off onto Albemarle Road and up to the Mint Hill Hospital, and could bring, say, Mint Hill into the mixture. But there are downsides to it. It does typically result in less TOD than light rail. I believe Mila, is that your name? Mila. She quoted a study that was done a couple of years ago about the health line, and they came out with this flashy number that said $5.5 billion in investment in that corridor. I think that study was rather inclusive of what counted as investment, and a lot of it was at the health facilities where very capital intensive investments tend to take place. So I don't know all the particulars of that study, but if I'm not mistaken, that we can't count MRI machines as part of our investments that are associated with TOD. So I would hesitate on some of these studies with BRT to take them at face value as far as what they say can be done. And then finally, I'd like to point out with BRT creep that I talked about earlier, I can think of no more fortuitous example than this picture right here. And I know people probably can't see it at home, but it has Metro Rapid BRT in our north corridor. And for people who know, that is not BRT, that's express bus and HOT lanes. So that's what I'm talking about when I say people call things BRT that aren't BRT. So those are the things I'd like to point out. And if I could offer this as a way forward, Mr. Herms made mention of this. I'd say we need to be very specific about how much we intend to dedicate to dedicated lanes, I'd say that needs to be at a minimum 85% as a community. So I know the FTA requires 50. I think we should, if we choose to do this, go for 85% and commit ourselves to some of the other improvements that come with true gold standard BRT. Like, if we are to do BRT, we should be the first in the nation to achieve that gold standard. The problem with that is that delta between the cost in LRT and the cost in BRT starts shrinking really rapidly when you go that route. So a lot of trade-offs. BRT can be useful. The health line in the dedicated lanes is a really nice system. But once you get away from that kind of standard, you end up getting into what amounts to glorified bus service. And I think that's something that needs to be discussed very much in the coming months and years.
I agree. Thank you very much for the report. Any questions? All right, having concluded our agenda, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Any second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.